They were almost wiped out at Fort Detroit. And so what they did was they fled in a southern direction eventually, and were almost decimated. And a group of them also went north, up around Mackinac and Upper Peninsula, and then they came down into the Montreal River area over here to the east that drains from the north. And Paul's familiar with that area. He spent some time there and some political battles, and maybe sometime Paul can tell us about that. But that was Fox territory back then. And so their migration map takes us up to, the Upper Peninsula, and what I saw was a series of these little minor explosions that they had as symbols on their map. And what those represented, of course, were battles with the Ojibwe. That's where my heart got sad. There I was standing with my friends, and Paul also knows these guys too. And I looked at those, little explosions all over northern Wisconsin, down near the Montreal River, all the way down to La Coudray. And I just, I better not do that. But my heart hurt, when I saw those battles. And I said, brothers, I said, of course we don't feel that way today. And I look back at this and I just feel sad about it. He says, well, Rick, it's the way it was, and we got through it. They almost got wiped out, and of course the Black Hawk Wars down near La Crosse almost led to the death of those people. And I look back on that as a sad chapter in all of our history. Okay, this is a little bit about the archaeological evidence that we described earlier. This was a summer gathering place because in the wintertime, Ojibwe had to spread out. And there wasn't much to spread out to, folks. South of here was just filled with these huge pine trees. And the trouble with these big pine trees is they have this coniferous cover on the top. All these pine needles just makes a blanket that blocks out the sun. And you can't grow gardens. The deciduous does not grow underneath those trees. So what does that mean for the white-tailed deer? Think about that. It wasn't a good place to hunt, but Ojibwe could fish. And one thing, if you look at a map of northern Wisconsin, you'll see 1 million lakes and rivers and streams everywhere. And Ojibwe also used that for their rice gathering. That means survival. And not a lot about, harvesting sugar from the maple, but fish. It was, and fur trade. The Ojibwe weren't venturing too deep into the inland off of Lake Superior in those times because the Sioux Indians the Dakotas were located in hunting parties coming up the rivers, and also the Fox Indians. So had to precariously, let's see, what do I have? I have an old-time map here. Louis XIV declared a moratorium in 1697 on fur trade west of the city of Montreal. And what that did is that set off an explosion among the Ojibwe up on the southern shore of Lake Superior. And what that caused, it caused people after 1697, it caused the Ojibwe to venture into northern Wisconsin, off of the lake. And at La Coudray, we have all kinds of evidence, archaeological evidence, of people moving into our region. we have kind of a 70,000 acre reservation that's kind of spread out along the Chippewa River. And also one of the things that Helen Hornback-Tenner related to me is she said, I used to work with her, and she was a remarkable scientist. And she said, now Rick, think about this. She said there were huge forest fires in northern Wisconsin. You would get these lightning storms and it would set off a blaze of those big trees. And she said there were a number of those oval shaped. She said if you were in satellite and looking down on northern Wisconsin, you would see these oval shaped burn areas that became filled with deciduous trees. So it burned over in the oval shape. It went like from Rice Lake to the village of Reserve, which is in kind of a southwest to northeast direction, in kind of an oval shape where the burn area came up. I always wondered why, and I asked Helen this, I said, why do you suppose the Odawa stopped at Reserve, which is now the Coterie Reservation? Why did they stop there if there were just these huge pine trees? And that's what her answer was, the big oval shaped kind of burns. So from Rice Lake all the way up to Reserve, she said, she said, all the things I've studied indicates there was a big burn area there because there was deciduous, and she said, you know what happened with the outliers after the Coterie settled at the Coterie area. Now, Radisson named that region when he visited there, he named that big lake there near Hayward, the Coterie, Lake of the Short Ears. And historians have looked back on that time and they said, now, why would he name those Ottawa Huron people short ears? Or did they have short ears? Well, one speculation is that they might have been clipping the bottoms of their ears as ornamental parts with some earrings. So maybe their ears were short. Another speculation is that maybe the big lake, the Coterie, had some bays that resembled ears. And if you look, again, satellite, look down on the lake, that's what you'll see. You'll see a series of these kind of ear-shaped formations on the lake. Nonetheless, he gave it a French name. Now, what happened next was bear clan hunters frequented that Le Coterie region. They knew about the Huron settlement there, the Odawa settlement. And also they frequent that area going up the Montreal River, inland off of Lake Superior. Now I wish I had time to tell you this story, but I think I'm running out of time. In 1744, probably because of William Warren, that's the year he designated, bear clan hunters lost a newborn baby at LCO. And the youngest son, who had just married a girl from here, Madeline Island, by the way, the bear clan hunters were from here. And they went south along the White River and worked their way down. There used to be a trail going down there because they were frequenting that back and forth. But in 1722, they found a dead Ottawa propped up on a tree. And this was in November, so the body was frozen. And the Ottawa was sitting along a tree with his knees up to his chest. And the father of this troop that went down there had a dream a couple days before that, and he said, the place we find the dead Ottawa, that's eventually going to be our home. And so what did they do? They found frozen, Ottawa Indian. Now what was the Ottawa doing there in 1722? This is you know, this is 60 years after they used to live there. And the historians suggest, well, you know, they were living over in Michigan by then. Maybe there was a hunting party that came over here and they were looking at a place that their grandfathers once lived or something like that. But nonetheless, after that, the Ojibwe named this site Odawa Saige Ganing. And folks, that's, you can use that Odawa Saige and as the lake of the Ottawa, or adding that ing would be the place. So that's what our reservation took on, and many of our people refer to our reservation in our traditional ceremonies as Odawa Saige Ganing. That's the place where they found that deceased Ottawa. Well, in 1744, you know, a couple decades later, hunting parties used to go down there, and they came to reserve because that was the opening of this deciduous forest. And wherever you find deciduous trees, you're going to find white-tailed deer. And that's, the people would stay there because it was on the north side of this huge 45-mile long burn area, and on the southern end were the Dakota mortal enemies. So that's kind of the story of how this got started. The baby died, and the father, this young boy, he was about 16 years of age. He and his young wife were so heartbroken that he told his father, "I'm not going back with you." Because they would stay for a couple of weeks to hunt the deciduous area. Then they'd come back, they'd, you know, get their loads of meat, and they would portage with their birch bark canoes, and then they'd say, "Okay, we got by this time. We got to look out for those Dakotas. Okay, we better head back." And this time the son, Eshbean was his name. I got it at the bottom there. And you know, nobody ever knew the name of his wife, but my grandmother and her sisters used to know that name. And folks, that name was about this long. And they nicknamed her Neani. They used to say Neani, but sometimes my great aunts would say the whole name, and I would just sit there and, why would somebody have a name that long? It was like this. Nonetheless, they stayed. And the father was outraged. He said, "You're not staying here, you know, you'll be killed. We got to get you out of here. Come on, son, you're going with us. We buried your child, and we did all the right things. Now let's get out of here before we get caught." And Eshbean refused. He and his wife stayed, and also this similar thing happened at Waswaganing, which is over in Lac du Flambeau, which is down near Minocqua. That's a reservation down there. And by the way, my father was from Lac du Flambeau, and so that's where my clan comes from, through my father over at Lac du Flambeau. And my brother, Ernie, does the history over there. I do the history at LCO, and he does the history. And we both have mother from the Coudray, and our father was from Lac du Flambeau. So my brother does that history over there. I put down here a series of names, and just to give you an idea of how this so-called chieftainship worked. It wasn't a chieftainship at all. William Warren interviewed many so-called chiefs, and he said, "Now you're the chief of this band." And the chiefs would all deny it. They'd say, "Oh no, I'm not a chief of anything. I happen to be, whenever there's a council of elders, I get asked to come in and give my opinion." And a lot of times they agree with me. You know, if there's something, civil strife or whatever, danger comes, I will tell them my opinion and make some suggestions. And many times they'll agree with me, sometimes they don't. And so the chieftainship was temporary. It was flighty. And these men were interviewed, and some of them were interviewed, and they all said the same thing. I'm not a chief. I'm sort of a head of a clan group, and they oftentimes ask me for advice and things like that, and he said sometimes they'll just say, no way. And he said, and as soon as that council breaks up, I'm just another hunter. I'm just another guy who fishes. So that's how, my brother knows all this history. But at Nakura Eshbian had a number of children, and some of his children became clan headmen. His daughters married into other clans, and so those clans took a hold at Nakura. And I know a bit of that history. I know a lot of this genealogy. I look at annuity rolls and things of that sort going way back into the early 1800s. And this is Kawenze, what's his name? This photo here was Kawenze. And he was the son of Mosojid. And Mosojid and Nenangabi were the grandsons of Eshbian, that young boy who refused to leave. So Eshbian became a headman at Nakura, one of the earliest headmen. And one of his brothers also became a headman. But today, the people at Nakura will point back to their, descendancy from these great people. I have friends today who oftentimes, cite, my wife her grandmother was the granddaughter of Nanangabi's daughter. Ojibwe Gishigokwe was her name. And he was a treaty signer. He attended 3 treaties. He only signed 2. He refused to sign the first. And Mosojid was the father of Kawenze, this man. And we've got a lot of people who are descendants of Kawenze today. But these folks were known. How do you become a chief? In interviews, these folks, especially with Schoolcraft, they just simply said, I was a heck of a warrior. There was a time when I was in hunting parties and we had to battle the Guan, who were the Dakota. We had to battle, and he said, and some of these guys said, I was right in there. I was a guy that never ran. I just stood my ground. And so from that, a lot of people considered my heroics as one of the reasons why they listened to me. And I oftentimes tried to avoid battle, and people enjoyed that too. Some of these, like Kawenze, he was sort of a hang around the fort